Right, good evening everyone. We'll begin the meeting. It's a hybrid meeting. It'll be therefore broadcast on Microsoft Teams and YouTube. Those attending virtually will not have their attendance officially recorded as present in the minutes. However, the virtual attendance will be noted in the item on apologies for absence and substitutions, and any members in attendance virtually will be able to speak but not vote. I'll move on to apologies. Do we have any members attending virtually, Sam?
No members attending virtually.
Okay.
And apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Padder.
Okay, they've also been received from.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, it was
Councillor Anand.
Councillor Anand. Sorry. And Councillor Mohan as well. Thank you.
And Councillor Jessel, and Councillor Moffat, and Councillor Hamidi. And we have one substitution. Councillor Raywall is substituting for Councillor Anand. I'll move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members? Nope. Any matters? There are no matters to be considered in private. Move on to item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of October. Does the committee agree the minutes? Thank you. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the budget context for 25-26. We have Councillor Steve Donnelly, Cabinet Member for the Inclusive Economy, and Emily Hill, our Strategic Director of Resources, who will do the presentation. So I'll hand over to Councillor Donnelly first to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, only briefly from me at this point. I know it's a regular part of the committee's work when we are approaching decision making on budget to look at the approach that the administration is proposing to take to council. This is very much not that presentation. This is an attempt to lay out to the committee as far as possible what we know about the overall context of decision making at national level regarding local government funding, and what we know about to this point about how that might impact or will impact us. As you heard from Emily, the amount of solid information we have is less than might typically be the case at this point in the cycle, which I think reflects entirely the fact that the new government is still in the process of changing the way in which approaches to grants, approaches to different types of funding stream are being made and prioritised, and that has taken longer than merely replicating what's done in previous years. We'll know at some point next week the provisional draft, the draft settlement for ourselves and all the other boroughs. That will tell us what we need to know in terms of driving forward to the next time that Emily and I sit in front of you, which will be to discuss the proposed way forward. So that's what we're here to do. I hope I hope that's acceptable and understood. And I will now hand over to Emily, who's far more capable than I of talking you through the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Thank you, Chair. So you've got a report in front of you, but I've tried to summarise that into a presentation which we can take you through now. I'm just going to try to share from my screen. Okay. Great, thank you. So as Councillor Donnelly has said, this year is an even more unusual year than usual. So I'm quite used to having late settlements and needing to pull together a budget strategy from there. But usually at this stage, I have much more information and better clarity that I can sort of guess or estimate quite closely what's going to come in the local government provisional settlement. At this point in time, I'm not able to do that. And as Councillor Donnelly said, it's because there are going to be some changes in some of the allocation methodologies that currently mean then I'm not able to estimate them. But hopefully I can take you through and sort of show you where that uncertainty is. As a result, we're sort of one of the fundamental elements of the budget, the funding, the total funding, is still highly uncertain. And so we need to sort of pick those up next week to then start to pull together the items that we will need to balance the budget. So I guess before we sort of even hit into what the funding changes would be, you are used to me talking about a legacy of real terms funding reductions whilst that demand and costs have increased. You're used to me talking about that. You're certainly used to me talking about that in adult social care and children's social care. And those pressures continue, and you continue to hear about them in the news, about market pressures in adults, and increasingly the government's view of private equity firms investing in children's homes and making sort of high levels of profit from children's social care placements. So you're used to me talking about that, but I think in recent years what we've seen is this addition of the rising costs and demand of homelessness and temporary accommodation. So it's both the numbers of people requiring TA, but also the rising costs of that. And that's really sort of almost causing a sort of tipping point for local government finance. It's further exacerbating what local government was just hanging in there and managing in relation to adults and children's. And those challenges continue to bite, they continue to hit us, but nevertheless we must set a balanced budget and we must continue to operate the statutory services that our residents rely on. So we have had, I think it was the end of November, a local government finance policy statement, and I would usually use that to help me estimate our funding. I can do in some of the areas, but some of them I still can't. So much remains uncertain until we get the provisional local government settlement, which should be next week. It's week commencing the 19th. I suspect we'll get it either on week commencing the 16th. Sorry, I suspect we'll get it on the 19th or the 20th. So that will be fun Christmas for me and my finance team. So just going through some of those again, you've seen some of this before in previous years, but we're actually working with 60% less funding than we were in 2013-14. So over 10 years ago, we've got 60% less money in real terms than we had then. And so that's what we're showing on the left-hand side. So the sort of orange line shows the reductions in funding, and the cash is shown in the blue. So the what we see on the right-hand side is actually you have seen what's called core spending power for councils increase in recent years. That's the blue line. In cash terms, our core spending power is increasing, and that is because core spending power includes council tax. So actually what you're saying is local government is increasingly being funded by council tax rather than government grant. So again, the orange line below shows the sort of adjusted for inflation, how total core spending power has sort of stayed relatively flat, but actually in cash terms that the funding is increasing. So that's pretty difficult. We're working with less money than we had 10 years ago, but actually not only that, but we're actually dealing with 15% more residents than we had in that same period. So less money to serve more people. And you can see there particularly a larger than average increase in older adults. So that pressures on social care happening because that change in demographics and more older people. And as I said, I think everybody now working in local government over the years has got well understood pressures in demand-led social care services, both due to It's not only population changes and levels of demand, but actually the complexity of care needs. You know, it's great now that a number of people's sort of life chances and opportunities are much longer than they may have had before, but that comes with sort of additional demand and costs on the local authority. And whilst we're all used to inflation, actually in those social care markets, we've seen costs rise much higher than the inflationary costs that we've seen. The market is demanding above inflationary price rises. And as I said, that sort of third additional pressure of homelessness is now outstripping the pressures that we had in social care due to a number of factors. So what does that mean for sort of residents and sort of the people that you serve and the casework that you have? I think what's really interesting here is the sort of colour. So if you look at that red block, we were spending 43% of our spending on other services. That's not social care, not homelessness, and not debt servicing in 2021. And in just that short period, that 43% of spending is reduced to 25%. So those services around libraries, highways, the universal services, waste, we've had to drastically reduce the amount of money that we spend on those services because of the huge increases in cost in social care. And as I said, those pressures continue. This is our Q2 financial monitoring. Q3 ends at the end of December, so we're just working on that now. But what the Q2 financial monitoring does is show exactly what a number of councils are showing across the country. Overspends against adult social care, overspends against children, and in that housing line, overspends in homelessness. So you can see there in the services with £20 million spending more than our budget. We have been fortuitous in that we've got a number of corporate budgets, well, one particular corporate budget which is offsetting that, and that is in relation to additional interest receivable, as interest rates have stayed higher than we have budgeted during the year. That and some other one-off costs that we've had, including a distribution from West London Waste, and then our usual contingency budgets. So a £20 million service overspend is reduced to a £3 million overspend, sorry. But actually those corporate budgets can't continue, and part of the budget process for 25-26 must address that overspend. So what we know, for example, when we've seen councils fail, in Croydon, for example, is one of the auditor's comments was that the budgets became increasingly divorced from the reality of what the council was spending. So we know that we are spending this money now. We know, and we must make plans to try to reduce that, but we must make sure in the 25-26 budget process that these overspends are addressed either through budget growth or through savings to fund the growth savings to meet them. So as we pull together our budget process, you can see before we even think about increases in future years' prices and increases in future years' demand, we know we have a £20 million pressure now. So what does the policy statement tell us in terms of funding? So we will get some increases in revenue support grant and baseline funding, and that will be by CPI. I'm never sure whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but CPI in September is the basis of our funding settlement. CPI in September was lower than it had been for a good time and has now increased again. So we know we're going to get an increase in CPI, but we know inflation already is higher than that increase that we will get there. There is, and in recognition of the pressures that local government face, there are increases in social care grant and a new children's social care grant. And both of those allocations are to be confirmed. We expect the social care grant to be similar to how they've allocated social care grant in previous years, but they have said it will be amended. So we don't know how much of that 680 million the council will receive. We can estimate at a very high level, but we're not sure at this moment. The children's social care is a new grant, and so there isn't an allocation that we can compare it to at the moment. Now, one of the things that could make the biggest difference to any council is what is this new recovery grant. So when the government talked about £1.3 billion investment in local government, it was through the social care element, that's 680 at the top, and 600 of a recovery grant. Now, the government's been really clear that that grant will be targeted to areas with greatest need and demand, and they're using deprivation as a proxy for that. And we can see that might support Ealing in terms of a sort of deprivation. So with one hand, we think recovery grant could be good to us and we'll get an allocation in there. However, they also say, and those boroughs, those councils least able to raise tax, so those with a smaller council tax base. So Ealing has quite a good council tax base. So the level in which the government is going to balance off those two when it comes to the allocations is currently unknown. And so we don't know whether we will get a good amount of recovery grant, but what we do know is the government has said it will be the case that this is meant to be a targeted grant, and it will be the case that a number of authorities don't get anything. So we could get nothing, or we could get something. And right now, I don't know enough. There's no precedent for me to be able to estimate that level of grant. And at 600 million, that is, it could be significant to our budget, but we just don't know at the moment. So we need to wait until next week, and we need to plan around contingencies around getting something or getting nothing. It's the most uncertain I've ever been as a strategic leadership team. I keep telling the strategic leadership team, there is a funding floor so that no authority sees a reduction in core spending power. So the government is sort of confirming that through this there could be some authorities that have reduced levels of grant. And even with the funding floor, they could have reduced levels of grant because the funding floor will include an expectation that they increase council tax. So if their grant reductions are less than their council tax increases, they may have a reduction in grant. They're taking away two grants, services grant, which we did have some of, and rural services grant, which we didn't. And I think they're going to redistribute that again through that targeting methodology. So this is continuing a trend that I've sort of pointed out in previous years of money moving from grants that were to fund general services into grants to fund social care services. So the funding continues to sort of shift towards local authorities funding social care. There will be new homes bonus for a final year ahead of future reform, and whilst the council's done really well in that in previous years, we know that the pressures and the problems in the housing market and housing development market mean we will not get significant amounts of that in 25-26. And then sort of on an administrative basis, the settlement will roll up some funding streams that are sort of separate grants that sit in services and roll them into the revenue support grant. We shouldn't lose anything there. It's just a simplification really of funding streams. So that's a long list of lots of different changes, and in summary really a number of allocation methods still not confirmed, and I need to wait until next week to have any certainty over the changes in our funding. And we do expect increases, increase in grant from inflation, and we'd expect to get a good chunk of social care grants, but we know we're going to have losses in our new homes bonus and removing services grant. So the expectation there is that we aren't going to have a sort of significant net increase in our funding unless we get a good allocation of the new recovery grant. But as I've tried to explain to you, that it's highly uncertain. I have very little to tell me what that might be. I have two indications: one, that it will be based on deprivation, and two, that it will be based on council tax base. But I don't know how those two are going to interact. We do have some additional funding for 25-26 outside what the government calls core spending power, which relates to extended producer responsibility and homelessness. But at the moment, we don't know that they are ongoing and how we can rely on those sort of in the medium term. One of the things you will have heard a lot of sort of media interest in is councils will get a grant for our increased national insurance costs, but that's only for our directly employed staff. And one of the biggest pressures that we see in that change in tax policy is actually on social care and other providers. So the government will confirm no additional funding for the increase in provider costs specifically for that. So that will remain a pressure that we'll need to manage within the budget. The policy statement has confirmed the council tax referendum criteria and has confirmed that 3+2, the 5% maximum increase, and that is assumed in their core spending power. And for your information, a 5% increase in Ealing would raise about £9 million. What the government has also said is, well, that is the national referendum criteria. If the council is in need of exceptional financial support, those councils in significant financial trouble, they could make an application to the government for a very specific council tax increase if it's critical to their sustainability, and the government will consider those separate requests. So I talked about two other grants outside core spending power. One is called the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. So this grant is an unring-fenced grant and a new grant, and it's intended to enable local authorities to maximise collection and recycling of packaging and meet the new requirements of simpler recycling. It should be used to cover costs for local authorities to manage packaging waste and provide additional funding for its new duties. Now, the reason why we need to be careful about this one is this is a tax on producers, people who produce household waste. So the intention is to change producer behaviour. And I give everybody the example of sort of the tray of raspberries that you can get with a film on top, and my children eat a lot of fruit, so we buy a lot of those. And just the last packet that I bought had stopped being a plastic tray at the bottom, but a cardboard tray at the bottom with a film on top. So this is the producers already responding to the fact they're being taxed for creating unrecyclable packaging and looking to reduce those costs to their production. So this grant is funded by the taxes that are raised through that behaviour, and if that behaviour changed, the taxes should reduce and therefore the funding will reduce. So we need to be quite careful about our expectations that this money will continue to come to us. And the government has recognised that, particularly in this year being a real sort of different transition year, and the UK government has guaranteed the funding for 25-26, so even if the tax doesn't come in, we will get the money, but it hasn't guaranteed it for the future. So we need to be quite careful around our expectations on this and knowing that it's expected that we use it to invest to meet sort of new recycling requirements. The other reason we need to be quite careful about it is the government is very clear that this year's settlement will be a single year settlement, and then it is looking at its spending review, which we hear in the news, and it will look at a new funding formula going forwards. What it is saying is it will take into account any EPR income in its what it's calling relative needs and resources. So what it might do is look and say, well, Ealing gets £4 million for extended producer responsibility. We therefore, it already has that within its resources, and we can therefore reduce funding by 4 million in the main grant because that is within their overall allocations. So I'm a little bit nervous about extended producer responsibility at the moment, and we'll know more about how the government intend to include it within its overall needs and resources in hopefully December. Homelessness, there was additional funding, and they're going to consolidate some other grants. Our current allocation is 6 million and a top-up. And what we're not sure is whether the additional funding is a replacement of that top-up or it is additional to that money that we already have. If it was allocated on the same basis of top-up, which we don't know, it would be 3.5 million, but that's still to be confirmed. And we don't know if that's going to be 3.5 million instead of the 1.7 or on top of the 1.7. Just a few other things for the bit of interest. We have a number of other implications outside the local government funding settlement. More money for special educational needs in the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant. So that's supporting our children with special school placements. 500 million for local roads maintenance. We don't know how that's allocated. That tends to come via the GLA rather than directly to us. And 44 million for a kinship allowance pilot. That's to support children and young people staying in kinship placements. There were no announcements yet on public health funding. It is a ring-fence grant. We get 27 million, and it's possible that that will increase in line with CPR, but that hasn't been confirmed. There are a number of other announcements. I'm not sure that I've put those into the actual paper for you. That they're just other areas that are relevant to local government. Reducing the right to buy discounts has across the country seen a big uptake of applications in right to buys. All of those will obviously be screened and might not go forward, but that has had a significant effect on applications. I think usefully and helpfully, household support has been extended for another year, and that's been extended. You'll probably be aware that that's been extended quite late in the year previously, so we know in advance of the financial year, and we can put plans in place for that household support fund. The guidance isn't out yet, but as soon as that is, we will put forward suggestions on how that's utilised. So just looking ahead, the government spending review is underway, but we expect wider reform of local government from 26-27. We also expect a multi-year settlement, which I think will be really helpful to ensure that we can plan on the medium term, but it's going to include a number of things. And you see again that sort of reflection like we've seen in the recovery grant about allocations based on the ability of areas to raise tax and an up-to-date assessment of need. So that's the sort of deprivation and other assessments of demand. So we'll certainly be looking out for that, and we're looking forward to a multi-year funding settlement, although the more important part will be how much that settlement is than being multi-year. So I think that's taken me to the end of the presentation, and I hope I've sort of covered most of the things that was in the report that you've had.
Thank you, Emily. That was very good presentation. Thank you. So I'll invite the committee members to ask questions, bearing in mind that Emily doesn't have the details yet, and a lot of it's uncertain, but we know that it's bleak and it could be potentially very bleak. So yeah, I think Councillor Ball first.
Yeah, just like to explore the simpler recycling. So is it correct that we'll have to have separate receptacles for So paper and card go in one, and the other dry recyclables go in another, and then the similar thing that food waste goes in with garden waste. So that would imply capital, buying a whole load of new capital expenditure to buy a whole load of receptacles, and then the funding might only be 1 year. We don't have a guarantee that the funding continues beyond that. So is that a big risk?
Thank you, Chair. So I think there is risk there with EPR because we don't know of that continued funding. I'm afraid I can't tell you the details of simpler recycling, but you're absolutely right that it will sort of confirm different ways to collect and expectations. I know the guidance that's come out is slightly, I think, allows slightly more local decision-making interpretation than the previous expectations were. And I think, for example, the point that you just made around food and garden waste, I think the previous expectations and guidance before it was issued as final was that we wouldn't be able to collect those together. I don't mean that local authorities couldn't, but now that they can, doesn't mean that we have to. And so we'll make a local choice on some of those. But yes, you're absolutely right. And the terms of the EPR are that there aren't conditions of grant. It is ring fence, but one of the purposes is to invest to be able to implement simpler recycling. So you're right, that could well mean investment in capital receptacles or other equipment that enable us to meet those. So like I say, because we know it's not ongoing, we may need to make a decision to hold that to ensure we have investment available and plans available to meet those simpler recycling. I think that simple recycling guidance only came out last couple of weeks, the finalised guidance. So the team will be working through that to understand the investment requirement for us then to understand what we need to set aside in the budget.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, just for, I think rolling back to what this is all about, which is about the perception and reality in some places that much of the work that's done around recycling can be undermined by the compromising of the materials in the collection and the processing. And about the worst thing you can do is spend a lot of time and effort ultimately producing something which then has to go back to landfill. So I think what the updated guidance, the thrust of that is to say where a council can demonstrate with confidence that its arrangements are satisfactory for the purposes of protecting from compromising the materials, then a council can continue with however many receptacles or that it currently uses. But I think everybody understands that we strike a balance between simplicity and purity. To have a German model of 7 bins per house is lovely if you have the infrastructure, if you have the space, if you have the ability to collect those things. We try to work a sensible compromise. I think on the whole it works, but we'll find out as we move forward whether any changes are needed in how our operations work.
Thank you. Councillor Conte, you were next.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. One was on the national insurance increase and obviously the rise in the minimum wage as well, and in terms of sort of external contractors, social care, etc. Is there any sort of prediction of how much of an additional cost that's going to sort of cost the council yet from that point of view? The other bits was about, I think you said there was a 12% additional households in the borough since 2013, I think you might have said. Obviously, what does that equate to in terms of increase in the council tax pot? Does that mean a 12% increase in the amount of council tax would generate, or 10 or 8%? I was just wondering, like, having that many additional properties, how much more does that contribute to the pot of council tax? I guess it's probably not exactly 12% means a 12% rise, but roughly what that is. But my final question was about the interest rates or servicing the debt, which I think was 16% of the current budget. Obviously, interest rates are going up or going down now. So do we envisage that proportion to be decreasing, or is the amount of money that we are borrowing going up so that will remain at 16%? So what do we think, that how will that change over time?
Thank you. So I think we're still probably working through the impact on NI and minimum wage. Minimum wage sort of less of an impact for us, although we have a different impact, is because all of our providers are on the real living wage, but that also increases but that sort of step increase in the minimum won't affect us because we're already paying. So we've got an inflationary increase in pay as we would on the real living wage. At the rise in national insurance, we think will hit that care market particularly hard because of the nature of the threshold change. It wasn't so much the small percentage increase, the nature of the threshold. So generally, those sort of industries with lower paid staff, like the care market, potentially jail, and things like that, are going to be hit more harder. Some of the sort of market intelligences, we will see an up to 8% increase in costs. So when you spend £100 million on social care, that's quite a lot of money. Obviously, we will continue to sort of negotiate and be clear on a sort of case by case basis as we get things in. But the sort of wider sort of conversations and market analysis is sort of 8% increase in social care costs. So that's that one. The 12% additional households. I couldn't even give you a number in my head. I was trying to do some maths in my head and think about that, so I might need to come back to you. It won't be necessarily a 12% increase because it will depend on the banding of each of those properties. And generally, I guess if you think about the number of households that have increased, they don't tend to be the larger houses because most of the developments are blocks, so they're going to be the lower band. So it will be less than 12%. But I couldn't give you the figure. I think the other point is those that are affordable, depending on the tenants within there, they may well get council tax support that will reduce the council tax ask. So quite a number of factors to come in. I could have a quick analysis and check what those are and come back to you. But I suspect it's less than 12, but I couldn't really tell you what, I'm afraid. And then 16% of debts, no, right. So the percentage may change because as we spend more money, for example, in social care and get increased funding, that percentage will change. When we actually take out debt, in general, we take out at fixed rates. So the amount that we pay in interest won't change. Yeah, most of our borrowing will be at sort of 30 to 50 years from the PW will be at fixed. So once we've entered into that, that's steady. At least it's steady, so at least we know what we have to pay. It doesn't move on variable rates like mortgages can. So there's not a lot of risk there. Equally, there's not a lot of opportunity, as there has been in a low interest environment. Once you're fixed, you're fixed. There isn't anything you can, well, we do and we continue to consider whether we can refinance it. PWLB and the government loans tend to be priced such that that if you refinance this, charge such a premium that it's not going to provide you any benefits. So in terms of that, in terms of the percentage, it will move because other percentages might move, but in terms of the absolute figure, it will stick. Only that if we have additional borrowing for capital, then that will increase. And obviously right now, if we were to take that borrowing out, it will be at much higher rates than that we have been used to, although not historically high at 5%. What we're looking at, because of that sort of quite high level of debt, is if we are going to borrow more, we expect that to be financed through additional income or other things, so it doesn't sort of cause a pressure on the general fund.
Thank you. Councillor Wall. Yep.
wrong one. Sorry. Yeah, obviously, multi-year sentiment, that'll be very welcome come the year after. And I'm sure that everyone will welcome it, not just in this borough, but across the country. The recovery grant, the slide read and the ability to raise council tax. Is that how it's written in the so it's the likelihood from me, or sorry, the question is that sort of a borough-wide, or could it be pockets of boroughs and pockets of deprivation within boroughs, rather than saying that that area, borough, board, whatever, is deprived, therefore you get it, and is the council tax raising ability in that area, or is it across the borough? I mean, you may not know the answer. It just comes in my head as I speak, really.
So I'm not sure if I do know for sure. It's like a lot of the things in this statement at the moment. I think it will take into account sort of ward level deprivation in order, because that's where the data is prepared on that basis. It will then come to some kind of averaging, I think, as it does that. I'm almost 100% sure that the council tax raising powers will be on a borough-wide basis. So that, I think that's the uncertainty I have. You know, immediately I think deprivation should help Ealing in terms of a funding formula, as would population, because we're a big borough and we've grown significantly since the last funding formula in 2013. But I think the council tax generating ability they will take as the total we can raise, and therefore they would expect us to apply it to those wards and demands in relation to deprivation, rather than sort of saying, rather than matching the two.
Thank you. Councillor Wesson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to you and the team for all the work you're doing, Emily, sort of navigating us through the uncertainty. Just a couple of questions. So in terms of spending on social care, that's obviously increased from 22% to 30% over the past 5 years. I just wondered if we had, appreciate it's incredibly difficult to project, but do we have any sense of what demand might look like over the next 5-year period in terms of any modelling that's been done? And then just in terms of the new children's social care grant, appreciate this is a 1-year settlement, but is there any sense of whether that might continue in future years, or perhaps that's uncertain too?
Thank you. So spending on social care, I think that is we are finding it pretty difficult to model. I think we're still actually still in a place where things are historically, we're not following historic trends. So we think we're seeing people, for example, at the moment living longer in residential care than we did pre-COVID. And whether that's because people went in earlier than they otherwise might because of COVID, and therefore we've got additional costs. So at the moment, we don't think we're at a new normal to be able to, because it may well be that sort of we'll see a number of those sort of increased costs in relation to COVID come down again in future. So it's quite difficult. What I do know, and what we'd expect to be sort of within sort of saving plans going forwards, is work that we need to do to manage demand in social care. How do we enable people to live more independently at home rather than in residential care, both because that's better outcomes for them, but it's also cheaper for us. So while I think there's sort of an underlying increase in demand because we see higher prevalence and, as I say, better longevity for people with learning disabilities and mental health issues, while we're seeing an increasing elderly population. While those numbers are going up, we're doing lots of work that we can to stop those going into residential care. So so very difficult to model, and what we're sort of focusing on instead is trying to stop that demand coming through, and that will be sort of part of the budget plans. In terms of the Children's Social Care Grant, this year is 1 year and 1 year only. We do have a multi-year settlement which will come, which will be, as you say, much welcomed. I think the government certainly has recognised the pressures in children's social care. I don't think that grant will continue, and I'm not even sure that the adult social grants will continue. But when they come up with this new funding formula, where they're talking about deprivation, need and resources, we would expect that funding formula to recognise the pressures in adults and children. So I think that sort of new children's social care grant won't continue, but I'd expect the formula to recognise the pressures in children's and adults.
Thank you, Emily. Steve, you wanted to have a word?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the stats around the demographic, pretty clear if the growth in older adults continues to outstrip the growth in the population as a whole, which outstrips the growth in the number of households, Councillor Conchi referred to earlier, then if we just carry on doing the same thing in the same way, things are only really likely to go in one direction, which would be ultimately unaffordable. So I think if these things have a silver lining, it's that they focus the mind on accelerating our focus to do things bigger and more quickly that we knew in our heart of hearts we should be doing more of anyway, which is about pushing the independent living agenda, not simply because it's convenient to us, but because it's a better outcome. It's a better outcome for people. I mean, I think in terms of the grants, I mean, I'm rarely. Some would argue I was rarely fair to the previous government, but I don't think the previous. I think everybody understands a multi-year settlement better, but you have to have a secure enough platform upon which to build it. And I think that the turbulence of the last 2 or 3 years meant that on every occasion that the previous ministers sought to address that, it just wasn't ready to do. So 1 year settlements were inevitable. This year it was inevitable while the government prepared the ground, its own platform, but for 3 years. And where the government now chooses to park particular streams of funding and how, so that the verticals and the horizontals will ultimately determine what that 3-year funding structure looks like. But as Emily says, ultimately how much money you get will always kind of trump how it's structured or dressed up or what title it's given. But at least we can sit down, as we haven't been able to do for years, and talk about a medium-term financial strategy in a meaningful way, which would be lovely.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Padder, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. It's only for clarity. The council tax increase is 3% for core council tax and 2% the adult social care. Is there anything else coming from? Usually there's something on from GLA. Is there? And how much would that be, if you have any idea on that? The total increase, it won't be 5%. It'll probably be a lot more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, no, you're quite right. So the 3 and the 2% is for the London boroughs, so those with social care responsibilities. And you're right, there is also an increase through the GLA. I don't know how much that is. Certainly it will be sort of subject to consultation and the others. Actually, I'm pretty sure that they have published their draft budget. So if it's okay with the committee, I will send a link to that through to Sam, and he can share that with you. So that will tell you at least what the mayor is currently proposing, and that will include the GLA precept, and it also includes the police precept, the Met Police as well. So yes, you're right. The sort of total council tax bill for an Ealing resident will include the Ealing proportion, but also the GLA and Met Police proportion. So I can share that budget consultation. I'm pretty sure has come out after this meeting.
Yes, please, Emily. Thank you. And I have Councillor Murtaza.
Thank you. It's not a question. It's partly question, partly suggestion. For my own knowledge and understanding sake, that coming on back to the recycling, we have seen an increase in all the superstores. They are charging all the bags. They started charging 5p and now up to 30p. Is there any arrangement with the local superstores and the council where they can assist us or help us increasing the amount of recycling bins outside the public places like surgeries or the hospitals? Thank you.
I'm not aware of any, but it's not my area of expertise. I know that we do work with businesses and residents to improve recycling, and we are one of the, I think we're the third highest recycling rate within London. So I know they will be having conversations. I'm not sure if we do that, but I think it sounds like quite a good idea. So I will, if they don't do it, I will suggest to them that they're talking to businesses around their own businesses. What opportunities are there for them to help us collect recyclable waste?
Thank you, Emily. Councillor Mohammed.
Thank you. My question is similar to Councillor Weston's question. It's the future is quite uncertain with the budget unknown at the moment. Do we have a contingency plan? Any of the budgets that we think we may not get it, or may not be available, for example, because we are rising the tax, council tax. So do we have kind of a plan B in case that we don't receive any grant or funding for that? And if it's yes, can you give us one example? Thank you.
So sort of an ultimate contingency plan is a sort of draw down on reserves. What councils do is meant to build up reserves to enable us to use them in the time where we have sort of late notice and to manage risk. I don't expect that to be the case here. I expect us to prepare proposals to enable us to balance the budget. I think sort of due to the lateness of this budget proposal, we are sort of as officers considering all potential areas of savings, but waiting until we understand what that sort of funding gap is before we sort of need to seriously sort of put them on the table and understand where they are. So at the moment we are continuing. We're trying to take quite conservative assumptions on the funding because it is so uncertain. We will know next week, but sort of as a result of that uncertainty, we're sort of putting together a number of proposals that we can then determine and decide on when we know what we need to do.
Thank you. And Councillor, sorry.
Yeah, and just to reinforce, no cabinet's made no decisions. That proposals around the budget will be worked through in conjunction with Emily and the senior leadership team. Obviously, Emily's referred a number of times to the recovery fund. Generally speaking, we know if a particular fund is going to be allocated on a binary basis or a step basis or a sliding scale, as Councillor Wall's question. We're not quite sure of the Boolean on this. Is it and or you know, to what degree is it going to work? And I think the reason it's unclear is they have been working through to achieve key outcomes in certain areas within what will not be an infinite budget. So I think that's why there was a degree of uncertainty in how it was expressed, and analysts within the sector have produced entirely varying predictions as to how it might impact on individual boroughs. If we do well out of it, and we are certainly not betting the farm on getting a big grant from it, but were we to do at the top end of the suggestions that are coming out, clearly it would open up more options for us than if we're at the bottom end. But options are always there, and as Emily said, you know, officers are doing the work to get us to the point of balance that we always need to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Rice next.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Yes, because I mean, I was going to ask a question that Councillor Conzi asked, but I suppose I'll have another part of that as well, because I was asking about the growing population and how that really affects us, and in terms of possibly even bringing in income. So I'm just wondering really, over the rising population, does it mean that our shops are more successful? Does it mean that there's more scope for shops to be opening? Is that something that we are used to experiencing? Because I'm just thinking in terms of if we have more shops opening, then there's probably more business rates coming through. I don't know if that would really be something that might help us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I'm probably not the best person there. Peter George, my colleague on SLT in terms of economic development and regeneration, is probably best to talk to you about sort of what's happening in our high streets. I think there's also, unfortunately, a sort of wider economic context where sort of businesses have been sort of struggling, particularly. We've talked about COVID twice today, and I tend to try to think that it's over, but it's not. I think a number of businesses also struggled in relation to COVID. So I think there's probably more pressures on businesses than sort of the increase in our population is sort of serving for them. I think the other thing I would say on business rates is it is clearer in council tax in relation to Councillor Conti's question. When we do have more households, we do receive more council tax. In business rates, there is a complicated business rates system where actually some of that goes to the government, some of it goes to the GLA, some of it comes to us. But even through there's this mechanism of top-ups and tariffs and top-up tariff threshold and safety net, where actually if we collect more, it's essentially a national funding source for local government. Because we're in Ealing and places like Westminster collect lots of business rates, it collects more than the government thinks that it needs, its baseline funding level, and that then goes to the government in a tariff. So if we collect more, we don't necessarily get to keep it, we just have to hand it over into government. So the kind of increase in business rates helps us for a period of time, a short period, and then it resets and that goes over into government. So I never think it isn't usually worth banking on business rates in terms of helping our income position because of the nature of the arrangement. If London went into another pool, a number of years ago we went into a London pool which then collapsed under COVID, and which a number of these sort of devolution deals include, then we would have more, we would retain more of our business rates rather than handing it over to government. So that sort of increase in businesses and the sort of benefit that we get from economic development would increase if we were in that. And that could be the case. Government is talking more about devolution deals. And so we could find London in another devolution deal conversation and pool where that increase in business rates would support London more broadly.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor Conti.
Thank you. It was just on the Q2 financial position. I was just wondering, obviously, with the £19 million overspend, I was wondering, compared to what the prediction was in Q1, how much that's changed. I just wonder what the forecast is? Do you expect that to change much in Q3 and Q4? Do we expect that overspend to get bigger, to stay the same, or potentially to go down over the rest of the year? And then just so I was clear, on the 15 million pounds that's helping to bridge that gap, some of that is from the interest that's been paid on money that you've got in the bank. Yeah. So in terms of that, is some of that money going to be spent, or is that reserves? I wasn't like what money is that, and how much is that sitting there that's earning interest?
I'm trying to remember the exact Q1 position, but my memory is that was better than the Q1 position. So we do tend to improve during the year, because as we understand and look at the spend we put in place, as much as I understand these are demand-led pressures that are being driving these overspends, strategic directors and services still need to work as hard as they can to remain within budget. So we do put in place actions during the year, and as we see those come through. So I generally expect that to continue to decrease. I mean, it's a pretty big job to get rid of another 20 million by year end, but I'd expect that to decrease. I would put a quite big caveat on that, and that's particularly in relation to homelessness and temporary accommodation. That's a really volatile situation. We've seen a number of big pressures across London now, and it's sort of causing real issues to financial sustainability in things that have been widely publicised, Newham, Brent, other places. So in another year, I would have expected that to keep coming down, not to zero, but I would expect that to be reducing. I do expect that in most of the other areas, but I do have a concern because we continue to see demand for TA and a difficulty in finding placements for those TA families. So in terms of the offset, that's right. A large part of that is external interest. As I say, we also had a couple of contingencies. We had some additional funding on adult social care, so there was a contingency there, and we had a distribution from West London Waste. But we currently have most months about £500 million in cash. That is a number of factors. It is reserves. It is the difference between our assets and our liabilities. So we have a number of debts, but we also have a number of people who owe us money. So we have the cash where we still owe people money, but it's yet to come. And then it is also still an amount of borrowing that was undertaken pre-COVID in order to fund our capital programme. So we're allowed to borrow to fund our capital programme. We're allowed to borrow sort of 3 years in advance to make sure you take it out at advantageous rates. We took that out at a time where we had fully intended to spend that money within the 3 years, and COVID hit, and a number of housing developments, a number of our other schemes have delayed. So we've got the cash from borrowing for our capital programme that hasn't yet gone out the door because the capital programme is delayed. So we're currently holding £500 million of cash, on which we are earning about 5% a year, which is a significant amount of income that is helping us manage that budget. So yes, the cash will come down to an extent because the capital programme continues now post-COVID, and that will come down. We will have still the cash from reserves and the difference in our working capital. So we will still have cash balances, but we had expected the interest rate to go down. I think it will still go down, but it won't go down as quickly as we'd expected. So I think generally the market expectation is that sort of post that budget, interest rates won't fall as quickly as was expected. So we will have to factor that into next year's budget as well. What I continue to tell my strategic leadership team is we cannot rely on that income in our base budget, because we know the cash will go down and we know the interest rates will go down too. So we have to be really careful about sort of relying on that to continue to fund services we know we will have to continue to provide.
Councillor Donnelly, did you want to come in?
I mean, just briefly to echo Emily's point, adults and children's social care remain enormous challenges, but they're challenges the kind of scale and scope of which are well understood. So the teams who are seeking to deal with those challenges are operating within known territory. The homelessness, it's kind of been a shadow coming towards us for some time. We were not amongst the early adopters, as it were, but it was pretty clear from a long way off that if this hit on this kind of scale, juggling all three would really stretch our ingenuity to keep things going well. Because I think we are known for a very strong homelessness prevention service that kept things away for a while, but we're definitely in it. And we don't really know how homelessness is going to develop. We don't know the timescale. We don't know the shape of the curve. We don't know how local and national initiatives around the financing of it are going to work, and the timing of those things. So there are far more unknowns around homelessness still than around the other two. And another point, I think clearly there's a multiverse in which COVID financial crash of 2022 never happened, in which in Ealing and in other places, large amount of house building went on. This money that Emily refers to was spent. Fewer people consequently are homeless because those homes were built. We're not in that multiverse. We're in the one in which these things happen, and we found ourselves with money that apparently in the short term we couldn't spend for the purpose for which it was intended. And I'm hurt that Councillor Conte clearly doesn't watch my quarterly reports to Cabinet on this, because I also frequently make the point that this is money we can't depend on, and I make that point around senior figures in the organisation, both political and opposorial. But my goodness, it's been handy.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Ball.
So Councillor Donnelly kind of almost answered what I was going to ask, but maybe go a little bit further. But yeah, returning to this multiverse, in terms of the housing pressure, I mean, as you said, it's very difficult to know what the curve is. I mean, basically what I was going to ask is, do we think that housing is going to join adults and children as a medium term, pressure that we keep getting year after year, or do we think it's a shorter, do you expect it to be something that will be a shorter lived phenomenon?
I was actually discussing that with our strategic director of housing and environment the other day. We were trying to muse on that together. There was a perfect storm of issues that have caused it, and certainly cost of living has been one of them, but it hasn't been the only thing. Asylum sort of policy and the sort of being outbid for accommodation from the Home Office for accommodation is another. There are a number of factors. Some of those may ease and some of them might not. Certainly don't think it's something that we suddenly get rid of next year. I think it will be sort of a medium term sort of phasing out. But I mean, the conversation we had was, well, we sort of think about the number of households that sort of come through as homeless. That has to stop at some point. So we think it's medium term, but there are a number of sort of policy drivers of this change that could switch in a moment. that would then ease pressures. Obviously, the current government is really keen on house building and homes, so there should be more homes, and we would expect therefore some of that supply issue to start to ease. But again, they're not going to be built tomorrow. They're going to be built over the medium term. I don't think it will. I mean, these adults and children's pressures have been going on for years now, 10, 12 years. I'm not sure it will be that long, but it's not going to end tomorrow. It's going to be a number of years in the making.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any more questions from members of the panel? Okay, well, can I ask Emily, in view of the fact that information will be coming towards the end of next week, that would have been ideal if we could have, if it'd been out, we could have had it today. Before we meet again in February, is there a way that you could distribute the main headlines, particularly the recovery grants and where we stand on that situation, and some bullet points before we meet again in February, so we can get the context before we go in and discuss all the detailed proposals, please?
Yeah, very happy to do so. I think that makes sense. What we tried to do today is sort of provide you the context so that when you get to the detailed proposals, you can concentrate on them rather than wondering how we got here, if you see what I mean. So I think that would make sense to do the same. So happy either to do that through a note or a short team session or something. I guess it'll depend what it tells us. If I could, maybe I'll tell you, yes, it's exactly what I said, only that we got no recovery grant. There may be no more to say than that, but we'll definitely put something together, and perhaps we can discuss with Sam and yourself whether you want a short team session to go through it or whether you're just happy with a note.
Lovely, thank you, Emily. Thank you very much then for coming in tonight and presenting to us. It's just a shame the future's so bleak, but fingers crossed, so thank you. Right, so we can move on to the last item on the agenda, the work programme. I met with Emily and we added some things into the work programme. The digital development, which is down to go in April, and the customer service strategy, which is down to go in February. I hope everyone's happy with that. The complaints, which I know that you wanted to be on there, won't be ready to come because of the number of housing complaints takes up the majority of it. Because we're changing the way we collect the data, it won't be ready to come as early as we had envisaged. But as soon as we can, we'll put that on there. So if everyone's happy with the work programme as it is at the moment, if there's anything else, just always feel free to let me know things we want added on and things like that. So if everyone's happy with that, I think the chairs are going to give a brief update of how they're getting on with their panels. So if we can start with you, Ben, and the health, please. Thank you.
Certainly. Over the past 2 years, I've chaired the panel, and we've suffered from losing one meeting each time. First time because the Queen sadly passed away, and the second time was because of the general election. So we're operating on a kind of 4 meeting per year cycle at the moment, which just means that everything's quite pressurized in terms of the panel's work programme. We, in our first meeting of the year, looked at the quality of the new care line service provided by Harrow Council. We had an update on Ealing Hospital, and in particular the Community Diagnostic Centre and Meadow House Hospice, and also looked at the impact of reductions in funding to the borough-based partnership as well, which does directly have an impact in the Ealing context. At our last meeting, which was quite timely, in preparation for this meeting this evening, we had a deep dive of the adult social care financial position, which was a really good opportunity, I think, for colleagues to be able to ask questions of Kerry in terms of some of the initiatives and interventions that he and the team are putting in place. We looked at the delivery programme for adult social care and spent time revisiting some of the NHS's approaches to or the consultation on improving same-day access. I think the only two other things that I wanted to flag up really are that I'm now participating in not one but two joint health overview and scrutiny committees. One which is the North West London one where all of the chairs of health scrutiny get together, but there's also a separate JOSC that's just been set up to look at the impact of proposed changes to the Mount Vernon Cancer Care Centre, and there are about 500 patients from Ealing that use the services at Mount Vernon. So I'll be very much pushing to see what the plans are for supporting Ealing patients moving forward. And I think that's everything.
Thank you, Ben. Lots of good work there. Thank you. So we've got Scrutiny Panel 1, which is Housing and Environment. Councillor Hamidi isn't here, so we'll move on to Scrutiny Panel 2, which is Councillor Faduma, please.
Thank you. My update is slightly longer. How long do I have, Chair? Okay. All right, I'll talk fast. Thank you. The climate, the sustainability and climate action scrutiny panel focus on the strategy set out 2019 by the Ealing Council declaring climate and ecological emergency in April 2019, committed to becoming a carbon neutral by 2030. So those pledges are divided into 5 themes. Those themes are energy, food, nature, travel, and waste. This has started back in 2021 with the end planned 2026, this strategy, but the strategy is progressing and changing by changes that happens in the climate. We're all experiencing that in Ealing and across the country and globally. So the recent achievements that has happened in those 5 themes include the energy side, over 13.8 million in retrofits, including ground and air sources heat pumps for sheltered housing, providing low carbon heating to 200 sheltered dwellings and 42 retrofits homes. Energy audits in schools and leisure sites to plan decarbonised heating systems. And we also launched the community climate grant schemes for businesses and anyone who is climate pro to fund energy efficiency projects in community buildings, with 5 projects completed and a new ones underway. On the food section, Ealing Food Partnership ranked 11th by the membership Sustainable Food Places, which is good news. They've been given over 40,000 funding for food routes to initiatives. And also we started the food sustainability through events like the Nourish Ealing, which has raised awareness and inspired local actions. Nature and biodiversity, we achieved half of the 50,000 tree planting goal that we have Ealing Council, with projects expanding to urban forest involving residents and businesses. We have got now Ealing Regional Park, which has been converted from Perivale Golf and it's called Pear Tree Park. We recently visited on our second meeting at the scrutiny panel. We also have 2 allotments and launched a biodiversity gardens competition to encourage residents' involvement. On travel, we have got the active travel but we also have the school streets now. Now there are 34 schools that provide educational providers, and we're planning 6 more. We also have 106 bike hangers with 25 more planned by 2026. We also have over 1,000 EV charging points, exceeding the targets of 10-minute walk distance for all homes. And we are expanding the micro-mobility services, including e-bikes and e-scooters borough-wide by March 2025. Waste, we have the waste collection program. We're now covering 36% of flats, aiming for 60% by 2025. We also launched, and perhaps you've seen it on the BBC, we have Library of Things and Acton Circular Economy Market to promote reusability and waste reduction items. And we have got initiatives of pupils' profit refill shops in 7 schools promoting green literacy among students. And that's the 5 things that we are doing on the strategy. But the challenges that we face and the forward plan that we have is the delivery depends on heavily on a national government policy, funding and community participations, as the council controls only 1% of the borough emission. The climate adaptation and resilience programme is being developed to address ecological and promote climate justice. A review of this strategy action is underway to ensure the target remains relevant and achievable with the result expected by mid-2025.
Thank you, Councillor Faduma. Very important work doing there. So Councillor Padder, your panel 3, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine is not that long. It's not sure. At the beginning, we had a problem because our lead officer, Robert South, was on leave. So we couldn't get our work program populated. But however, on 18th of July, our first meeting, we work on our the term of reference work program, and also we look at Ofsted inspection report. That's a very good report. Actually, quite after some time we got that report, and that's everybody was very pleased with that. Then on 3rd of October we looked into that was the second meeting into NEAT. We looked into how the agency is dealing with this, including the youth justice system as well. And the next meeting on 14th of January, we'll be looking at safeguarding children's report, care options for children, fostering report, and kinship strategy report. These are our for January, but on the April 1, we haven't populated our work program yet. Okay.
Thank you. Excellent, Councillor Padder. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Ball, SD4.
Yes. So at the last meeting of the Strategy and Change panel, we robustly scrutinised the Your Voice, Your Town programme, and there was a lot of questions from colleagues, and some useful recommendations came out of it. And we also looked into various streams of council grants that are open to the voluntary sector. So we're going to organise site visits to Barking and Dagenham to learn about their resident engagement process, which is I think they're kind of quite unique in having a similar sort of idea to the Your Voice, Your Town. So it's trying to see how that works in practice. And we're also more locally organising a visit to Ease in Acton, which is ahead of the scrutiny at the January meeting, when we're looking at Ealing's work with refugees and asylum seekers and the ambition to become a borough of sanctuary. And at that January meeting, we're also going to be looking at the work of Ealing's Race Equality Commission.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Ball. Okay, I think that brings the meeting to a close. I wish everyone a happy Christmas. And I hope we get some good news from the settlement before then, but who knows. Anyway, thank you all for coming tonight and for all your hard work, and happy Christmas. Thank you.